advocate. You are muted, Jumaane.
Yes, hello.
All right. It's good to see you. How are you, my friend?
I'm pretty good. Sorry for the few
Don't
minutes late.
worry. It's a busy day. We'll talk about schools in a little bit also. We got a lot to talk about. So welcome again, everybody. We're very, very excited to have an old and dear friend of mine who I have been a fan of, and I think the feeling is mutual for a very long time, Jumaane Williams. But first, let me thank again Langen Engineers for sponsoring us today. George Leventus, thank you. Jumaane, you know, I could talk about you all day, but I'm not going to because we got a lot to talk about. But I first met Jumaane when he was on Community Board 18. Is that correct, Jumaane?
That's probably correct.
A while ago. We were both a little younger. We both had more hair back then.
That's right.
His looked better than mine. But Jumaane and I met. I was working for Marty Markowitz at the time. And then I remember Jumaane at a meeting coming over to me and telling me he was going to run for city council. And I thought that was a great idea. And obviously, Jumaane, you did a great job in the council. You're really reshaping, I think, the role of public advocate. And given the times we're in with uncertainty with budgets and COVID, and obviously social justice issues, you're really the right person at the right time for the job. So I want to welcome you. We've got several hundred people here listening from across the building industry, contractors, architects, engineers, MWBE companies. Our chair, Liz Velez, who's the president of the Velez organization, is on. So how are you, first of all? I know you've had a busy couple of weeks. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I am working on being okay. You know, there's a lot going on. The feeling is definitely mutual. I appreciate the kind words. I don't want you to lose any support, though, by saying you're a fan. So
it's okay. People know I'm an honest broker, and I'll always say I'm a fan of yours.
But, you know, I appreciate that very much. We are going through some rough times. Should I go into opening and just...
Go into your opening, whatever you want to say, and then I'll jump in with some questions. But it's going to be a free-flowing chat.
Oh, cool. Well, I mean, as you mentioned, you know, we met a pretty long time ago. Thankfully, I can still say I'm still younger, so that's probably going to go on for quite some time. We have definitely some unprecedented times going on now, and so these conversations are really important. And just reminding folks, you know, all of the issues that are to the fore now. It's about race, health disparities, kind of equity for everything. None of them are new. They're in acute focus, and they've been exponentially magnified, obviously, because of the pandemic. And I think that's important to remember as we begin to climb out of this. My fear is that people get to some collective amnesia, and I just want to prevent that from happening because, like I said, none of these issues are new. You know, we have a long-lasting relationship with you, Carlo, and many people who are here when I was the chair of housing and buildings, working on a lot of different issues. Some we agreed on, some we didn't. I think it all came together for good. We know we got to make sure we look at, as we come out of this, who's building the city. You know, we talk about equity in the building industry, some of the worst in terms of who gets city contracts and who doesn't get city contracts. I know Crane just came out with a report. 1% was probably got MWBEs and 90% went to white firms. And we got to make sure that we intentionally focus on these issues. It's sad, but most of the folks who will hire the people who are feeling the effects the most generally look like them. So when they're not getting the money, it's a problem because it's not filtering it out when they're not hiring the people who probably need the assistance the most. We also saw some disparities in the PPP, who got the money, who didn't. We did put a bill in recently to try to make amends with that, to try to focus on some of the smaller businesses, some of the immigrant businesses and the MWBE businesses that just had no access to PPEs. Hopefully a bill will move forward to help folks that and fine tune it a little bit more. It'll also give some interest-free loans to small businesses. And then we've been pushing, you know, a green new deal of our own, where we can help replace some of the infrastructure with greener infrastructure, but at the same time help get some jobs back on the front while we're recovering. But that does take some political courage as well, because oftentimes people know what we need to do, but when you start directing the money and the funds there, it's not things that people immediately see. And so it takes some political courage to move it forward. Hopefully we can together encourage our folks who have that ability to just do it, to actually have the courage that's needed. So, I'll stop there. I know we're going to jump into some questions.
No, I agree. There's so many things we can talk about. We just announced that the Building Congress is launching a new task force that will be co-chaired by Liz Velez, who I mentioned is our chair, and Cheryl McKissick, who is the president of the oldest Black-owned construction company in America.
Wow.
I think Cheryl's on listening to us. And we obviously want to sit down with you, hopefully in person soon, but otherwise in a Zoom, to talk about it. I think the one thing we decided with this task force is no more reports, no more studies. We know what the problems are.
That's right. I think that's right.
We know the problems are. We need to put people of color, particularly young Black men, to work and do it fast. And I think one of the things that we want to talk to you about and work with you about is how do we create a borough by borough campaign where we say to our members who are ready to roll up their sleeves and really help put this together, to say we need to rebuild the city. We know that. We need to rebuild schools. We need affordable housing. We need new roads, new infrastructure, everything that our members do. But it's time to really pull together a plan of action that includes communities of color and people in Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens, et cetera. Have you thought of some ideas? Because look, the quickest way to put people to work is to build. Let's build schools, let's build housing, and pull everyone together.
I think that's right. Excuse me 1 second, I want to turn my fan on. It got a little hotter than I thought here.
That's okay.
But one of the things that I want to focus on the fact that I think it's great to put together teams of folks to work on this and other things. I think task force are great, but one of the things that you said is like, we know what the problem is.
We do, we get it.
Across the board. So we don't need the studies. We don't need another big paper.
We agree.
We have enough, and we just need to put it to action. The thing about, breaking down systems that have been inequitable, it's hard and it's uncomfortable, and that makes it hard to push through. And people who have experienced the most privilege, no matter where you are, white, Black, straight, gay, cis, trans, the folks who've been benefiting the most from the privilege, it's uncomfortable because some of that privilege is not going to be the same when you finish. And so we have to unpack it. And I believe you're right. Let's build some stuff. Let's build some schools. Let's build some roads. Let's redo the sewers. Let's, I'm into replacing energy systems the way we have and putting down some green energy. But we have to bring everybody to the table. And so we didn't get here by accident. And so while we have to bring unions to the table, because we want to make sure that the things that give people the ability to get to the workplace quicker, we unpack that and make sure that people who haven't historically been there can also get to the front in a very real way. We need to make sure that companies who have had access to the capital, access to the bonds, take folks and show them how to actually do that. And that means that they may not get every single dollar of the contracts that come, but that's the only way we're gonna undo this. So people have to be willing to understand the place where we are in 2020, we didn't just get here. And there was some advantages that occurred tens and decades and years before that. So we have to undo some of that. We have to be willing to do that. And we have to have everybody at the table say, yes, I know how it's supposed to work, how we've set it up, but we have to undo that. We have to let some people in to make up for some of that time. We have to mentor and let some of these companies and show them how to do it and let them in, even though they may not have been doing it as long. That doesn't mean you sacrifice skill and sacrifice the ability to do the work, but we have to just make up for the time that people didn't have access to the same amount of resources.
Right, I agree. Jumaane, I think the one of the things we looked at was there's like a two-lane approach to this. So one is what do we do fast? What do we do right now to get people to work, to break barriers, and open it up to communities of color, particularly in industry. When you look at particularly labor and contractors, it's over 60% non-white now. So we've moved in a good direction on that. But so one is, what do we do fast? But I think the second question that's going to take a little more work is, what do we do for young people? How do we get young people in middle school and high school to get excited about careers in engineering and architecture and construction and all of that, and design? Because there's so much money to be made. There's so many opportunities. And I think we have all collectively failed in getting young people and giving them the opportunities in schools to take advantage of future careers where they would be making over $100,000 a year.
Even with labor, I would say there's some labor unions that are much better than others in diversity. So I want to make sure we point that out. There's still some work that needs to be done in certain sectors. And of course, the higher up you go in who's making money and who's making decisions, the less diverse it is. So we still have to change some of that as well. But your second point is very, very valid. We need some pipelines. The pipelines don't really exist, and do they exist, they're not strong. I know Local 79 has some pretty good pipeline programs, but they're not enough. And it really doesn't make sense in a space like New York City, where we have so many schools that can be connected to other schools, and that can connect right straight into CUNY. New York City Tech and other places that have these natural places for pipelines to grow. We're just not accessing it, and someone has to put that connective tissue in. And also, we have to be comfortable with saying not everybody's going to go to a 4-year or get a master's, and that is also okay. We have to make sure that people understand how important that is. First of all, how important a college degree is, period, and also understand that everybody's not going to take the same road, and it's okay if you want to take a road that, as you said, can provide very good income for folks at the level you're saying as engineers, but even as just as construction,
right.
Getting a trade, that's perfectly fine. And I think we began to switch a little bit, saying that it's not fine, but we have to encourage it. We have to get those avenues available, and we have to intentionally do it. But we have to go to the areas we know are the problems. East New York, Brownsville, South Bronx. There are places that we know. I always say we have to follow the numbers, right? For some reason, the NYPD are the only ones who follow the numbers. I look at these numbers, and I just never understood why. We have precinct commanders that have to stand up, and their career depends on them defending whether or not they alone worked on these numbers. Why is everybody not looking at that? Why is CUNY not looking at that? Seeing where we need to focus, where this pipeline goes, or the Department of Education. And those are the type of creative ways that shouldn't be that bold, but they sound bold. Let's just all look at numbers and see what's there. But really, we have to get into those schools in a way that we're not there. And there's a lot of partners who just have to allow that to happen and be okay with it. And, junior high school is the point where young people are making a decision if they're going to go left or right. Oftentimes, after that decision, we now have to undo things that we could have just prevented in junior high school.
I agree. And I think you really bring an incredible point out, which is follow the numbers. In our industry, as we look towards the future, we have to invest in middle schools across the city. But the Department of Ed, the Board of Ed, needs to really be a partner and say, trade is equal to college. And if a young person, male or female, wants to go into a trade, we want to help them, and we want to connect them with people in the building industry and build a 5-10-year program out so that when that kid is done with high school or a couple of years of college, he or she is ready to be placed in a program. And I think you'll find that good apprentice programs out there already. We just got to really bulk them up and do even more. So a lot of good things that can come.
Absolutely. And we have to get us, equal, not equal. I don't even want to get into that creates some stuff, but there are perfectly good avenues of which that people should be welcomed and encouraged to choose. We always want to be mindful of, some people historically have been pushed certain places. This is not about pushing. This is about avenues that we want to make available to everyone, and people can use the skill sets that they want, so they can make a living. Just the same way it's happening in other places. So we have to have that conversation sensitively, but we have to have it because there are great avenues to real careers. And we do want to make sure, even with the apprenticeship programs, that when people are hired, they stay hired. And that's been one of the issues I heard in some of the apprenticeship programs, that sometimes they get hired and then let go. But we have some good fixes if we can, again, get the political courage to kind of push that through.
I agree. And I think when you look at the building industry, particularly our members who are building the things New Yorkers rely on, they build the subways, the infrastructure, the schools, the housing, the hospitals, the universities. I think we are a perfect vehicle to help direct the conversation across the city about how do we open up opportunities and jobs. And I'm telling you, we are committed to that. And it's something that I think we all learned the disparities, and maybe COVID was necessary to bring them out more. It was not a good necessary, but it brought out a lot of things, and I think we all learned from it. So we're committed with you on this. I want to talk a little bit about affordable housing. I know that's been one of your signature priorities. Many of our members are doing work in NYC. They're building affordable housing buildings. And many of them tell us we should be doing more. We could be innovating more. We could be creating new things. Tell us some of your thoughts on what ideas do you have to help spur the construction of affordable housing across the city? How can we get more?
First, NYC has been failing. I always forget the section. I think it's section 3. I'm not sure, where they are required to hire NYC residents in work that they're doing in NYC. That never really seems to happen. So I just want to put that out there. That's an issue with NYC that we've been pushing for quite some time. It's been years, and I can see someone saying we don't have the infrastructure set up right now, but they've been saying the same thing for decades, and that's a problem. When it comes to affordable housing, I try to say income targeted, because each of us can afford something. So we want to make sure it's income targeted. Fortunately, obviously, the lower down you go in the income that you make, the less likely you're going to be able to get something that is safe and that fits the needs that you have. And again, we just have to be intentional. And so I have a bill out that does say we have to have a racial impact study done before any rezoning happens. People have balked at that, but we have seen clear with data what happens in certain rezonings before and after in those communities. And we want to make sure that impact is known beforehand so we can mitigate. Let
me interrupt. Can you explain what that means? Because a few people have asked me, and I've said, I don't even know what it means, but tell us in your mind.
It basically means, we want to put it in the environmental study. What will be the impact based on race and ethnicity that's there? What will be the impact on those people after a rezoning? Because very often, and we saw it in Williamsburg, we do rezoning and we allow more density, and it pushes some people out. And the math, I've always said, was always weird to me. If we are going to a community that doesn't have any income targeted affordable housing, and then you want to build 100 units, 80 of which are market rate, 20 of them are so-called affordable, and of those 10, it's at 165% of AMI, you'll probably make the problem worse. And those are the numbers that people couldn't really see, and that's been bearing out, especially with something like MIH, mandatory inclusionary housing, which I was, one of 5 members to vote against, because I think it didn't go deep enough into affordability. More importantly, it didn't make the deep affordability that it had mandatory across all options. And so you keep the city pretty segregated, because you have some members that are going to take deep affordability and some members that won't, and it doesn't help the process of desegregating the city. And even what they did have in some of those options weren't really affordable. So I've called for a moratorium until we can relook at this MIH and make sure we have the deep affordability in there. And I believe we should do racial impact study before we have those rezonings, because what we're doing is not working. So we can't pretend that it's working when it's not. And then when we're building, everybody just has to give up something. Unions have to give up something. Contractors have to give up something. The city has to give up something. That something is generally usually money or profits in one way or the other. But we all have to do it because this housing crisis is a very real one. And I believe that all of these things are connective tissue to public safety, which is what I've been pushing for so long. Yes, we absolutely need our law enforcement partners, and we want to be clear about it. But if the only thing we're going to look at is law enforcement, public safety, we're going to miss by miles. We have to look at housing, we have to look at jobs, we have to look at education, all of which infrastructure hasn't existed in the same communities that we're seeing an uptick in crime now. And we can't use that as an excuse. I can't excuse anybody taking a gun out and shooting somebody. But we have to look at what is the underpinning so that we can try to address it. And housing is a big one.
It sounds like, so if I'm understanding this, you're not opposed to rezonings. You just want them done in a better way and a more equitable way.
Absolutely. I've asked for the racial impact study, and I've asked for contextual zoning. What I've said to folks is, if we look now the way we did 100 years ago, we wouldn't be New York City. And if we look 100 years from now, how we look now, we would have failed. And so we have to make these changes. I don't think a community should look in just completely different overnight, but there has to be slow growth and slow changes. There's nowhere around it. This city is New York City for two reasons and two reasons only. We learned how to build up, and we have an impressive transportation system, especially on the ground. You take away any of those two things, and we're going to have a problem. So the question is, how do we contextually zone in a way that the community is involved, the community at least feels their concerns were heard, that they had discussions with them about where we can accept density and where we think we should keep density the same, because everybody has to give up density. That's not the question, but we should have better communication about where the density is going to go in each particular community.
Right. Good. Well, count us in to help as that plans out, because obviously our members want to build the two things you mentioned that are critical to New York, the housing and building, and of course the underground infrastructure. And you know, the MTA is clearly going through a rough time right now. We want to see continued growth in rehabilitation stations and really helping them get their capital plan done. So a lot of great things ahead of us, I think, just a matter of us coming together. So you mentioned gun violence. Let's talk a little bit. I know you've been a real advocate on getting guns off the streets, and obviously the last few weeks have been a little hard on everyone. And sadly, children, and we heard some horrific stories in the last few days over the weekend. What should we be doing, Jumaane? You know, we've been talking a lot. What are we doing that's failing, and what should we be doing that's better?
And my heart has been heavy since this weekend. It's just a lot of death, a lot of people shot, and people have died. You know, I want to remind people that this is not just a New York City issue. This is happening across the country. So we want to make sure that we put it in that proper perspective. We also know that the pandemic has magnified every issue. And we shouldn't be surprised that gun violence is one of them. Everything else has been magnified. Issues that were there before that have now become worse. And so we have to first look at this thing honestly, because if we don't have an honest assessment of the story behind the upticks, then we're going to have a dishonest approach that comes with other things. And so first, I always remind folks that we were at historic, almost unsustainable lows when it came to crime and gun violence pre-pandemic. It was amazing. And people hear people talk about it, they acted like they were not, but it really was. And then there was a global pandemic that hit. People were home for months and months, then came outside to an economic level that was close to the depression. Nothing affects crime more probably than economics. And so we have to be honest about that so we can have the best approach that actually deals with the underlying issues. And again, these are not excuses. We have to have people responsible for their own actions and and accountability for self and accountability thereafter. So but I want to make sure we're looking at it clearly. And so our law enforcement and police have a role to play here. It seems that whenever we're having this discussion about accountability and transparency in the police department, or saying that there was confusion about what people meant when they said defund or divest or reinvest, and for me, it was not. It was only that this can't be the only response. If we only send police again, we're going to have some problems. So what else are we doing to address the concerns? And for me, it's really, how do we redefine public safety? Not just here in the city, but across the country. What do we think public safety has? In Minnesota, there was a big hoopla about Minnesota City Council voted to get rid of their police department. Well, in actuality, that's not what happened. But they created an Office of Public Safety, which the police department now reports to. And that's a great way to start thinking about this, because for far too long, as I mentioned earlier, the only people who are responsible for crime was the police department. We just said, obviously, it took credit every time crime went down. If it went up, not so much, but that's the only thing we would send. And so what we saw in this budget that made me so disturbed, even more than the billion and some other things that I had issues with, was that every agency was defunded, probably more than the NYPD. And so we told the entire city there was a hiring freeze. So we couldn't hire more doctors, more nurses. We couldn't hire guidance counselors, teachers. The gynecological oncology department is closing in Kings County, in Kings County Hospital right now, even as Black maternal mortality rate is higher than anyone else. Those things are happening, but the one thing we did have the capacity to do was to hire 1,000 new police without even a discussion about, well, what can we do with the 35,000 we have? Why are they answering mental health calls? Why are they answering and writing down traffic reports when there's a car accident? Is that really something they need to do? Why are they holding up barriers at parades, telling people where to go? So we have resources, and how do we use it? And why can't we reinvest it into things like the Cure Violence model that works really well? People were talking about restorations to the budget, which was great. City Council did a good job based on the framework that was put forth. But we went from 75,000 summer youth jobs to 35,000. The number one way to cut violent crime arrests in half is a job. That's by all the numbers. And we need police officers and precincts to buy in to a different model. One place that we've seen this buy-in work well, someplace like Queensbridge. It is the largest public housing complex in North America. They had 0 shootings over the 4th of July weekend, which is amazing. And we need to look at what's happening there. What's the communication? What's the buy-in that's working? And so the number one thing, just by the way, is this country has a demonic obsession with guns. It's unbelievable. And it's not just illegal guns. Every illegal gun was legal at some point. And so we have to deal with the access to guns. But then we have ways that we can deal with the demand for guns in a way that I think people are afraid to have. What is public safety? What does it mean? What is law enforcement's role in that? And the way I usually liken it is, we keep using an acute solution for complex problems, and it sometimes makes it worse. So if we were sick and we went to a hospital and they only allowed us to stay in triage, but they didn't allow us to go to the back of the room where the interdisciplinary doctors are and all the great machines to look at what's happening, we'd never get well. And so that's a discussion that somebody has to have the courage to move forward, because the victims that we're losing, they deserve us to say that these communities only have 2 choices, which is violence and jail.
Well, it sounds like I'm looking at somebody who can at least help move that conversation forward. So let's keep working on it. You mentioned jail. Let's talk about Rikers. Obviously, that's been a topic of conversation for many, many years. I remember I was working for Marty at the time as his chief of staff, and there was the Bloomberg original proposal to create jails across the borough-based jails. Now there's obviously the proposal that was adopted, Rikers to close, new borough-based jails. DDC put out already the RFP, and people have won it. to start building borough-based jails. Give us a sense of your position on that and where you see it moving forward, given budget crisis and everything.
That was a tough one, and I tried not to say which way I would vote, because it's easy to say how you would vote when you're not the one voting.
Right.
So it was a very difficult discussion, because I always say the people who are closest to the problem have the solution. And so I want to make sure it's led by the people who are most affected. But people who are affected by Rikers and the justice system were on both sides of those issues. And so it was difficult. And people, it was formerly incarcerated people who helped design the system of the borough-based jails and closing down Rikers. So I understood both sides of the issue. What I try to say was this: irrespective of what we do, the culture of Rikers makes no sense. And we have to change that culture. There's no sense of bringing that culture to 5 new borough-based jails. By the way, there's great evidence that shows when people are closer to their networks, they are going to fare better when they come out, which is what we want. So many things bad will happen in Rikers, and some of it is because it's out of sight, out of mind. And the system, the way it was set up, was created. Like, people shouldn't be shocked by some of the violence that we saw there. It's just created that way. And we have to restructure it. We have to restructure how correction officers are trained. We have to restructure what services we're able to bring there. Many people may not know, but the largest mental health facility in the country is probably Rikers Island. And so the tremendous amount of people who have mental illnesses and mental health issues right on Rikers Island are a problem. So we're basically putting everybody there that we don't know how else to work. My biggest thing was, like, if you're going to put this type of money for new borough-based jails, you have to put a commensurate amount of money for the services needed for the folks. And you have to put a commensurate amount of money for things like deeply income targeted affordable housing. And those two things have yet to happen. And so that's what I'm most focused on. Either which way it went, where is the funding for the things that are going to make it successful? And I always remind folks, where they try to, complain about some of the good things that have happened there. In the 90s, we may have had almost 20-something thousand people in Rikers. It was over capacity. We're down to about 6,000. And this spike aside, even with this spike, we're at historic lows. But we didn't see the commensurate amount of increase in violence that people thought we would have. For the thinking of the changes of criminal justice are just directly linked to the increases, we have gone from over 20,000 people in Rikers to maybe around 5,000-6,000. By that logic, our violence and crime should have skyrocketed over the past few decades. But quite the contrary happened, and we have to look at why, and we have to keep moving forward, because we know if our response to this is what it was before, then we won't learn the lessons we should learn. And I don't want to get collective amnesia. I want to take this lesson, these lessons that we're learning as a country, these lessons about privilege, these lessons about learning just what it means to have enslaved an entire race of people, that might actually reverberate 400 years later, and how do we atone for that in a way that makes sense for everybody. And the fact of the matter is, nobody on this call is responsible for that system that we got in 2020, not you, not Carlo, not me, but we're all responsible for the system that someone's going to get in another 100 years. And that's a place where I think we can all grab it and do something.
I think that's right. And I think where we really start is education, and in our schools and in communities. So we have about 12 to 15 minutes left. So I want to jump into schools for a little bit and education. And then I want to talk about your future. Maybe you'll make some news today or something, we'll see. But today the mayor announced with the chancellor some version of a school opening. To be quite honest, I don't really understand it. I'm still talking to people to get, I know several people watching us have reached out to me to get some information. We will get information as soon as we know. But then the governor's office put out a press release a little bit after that, saying that the governor will make the decision first week of August about opening of schools. We're back to parents and educators not knowing what to do, including me, by the way. I don't know where my 5-year-old will be doing, what she'll be doing in September. So obviously you have a role in all of this. Give us a sense of what your thinking is with the dynamics and school opening and what we should be doing.
In October, I got engaged, and with that came a stepdaughter. So I became instant stepdaddy. So
When's the wedding?
Shh.
Sorry. I'll call your mom and ask her later.
We're probably looking at.
Please give your mom my love, by the way.
I will. Thank you. We're probably looking at 2022.
Okay.
But
right, you're going to be busy in 2021.
I am. First of all, I'm tired of this measuring contest that the governor and the mayor keep having. That in itself is just dangerous, and we've seen the danger. We all should, from the beginning, kind of should have been on one voice. That's impossible to do in a schoolyard where people are just, I don't know what to say. I mean, everybody sees it. We know what it is. And it's frustrating to watch as people are making real life decisions. And I've been very clear about other errors that I think were made, especially at the beginning of the COVID, decisions that could have made better because we had the data, irrespective of what the governor and the mayor says, we had the data to make better decisions. We didn't make it fast enough. We didn't make it clearly enough, and we weren't bold enough in moving it forward. With that said, first of all, we have to set the tone together that we're going to figure this out together. And so we have to part of it is that we are not clear in our messaging. And our messaging issue to New York, it should be, we are going to figure this out together as we move forward. And we need some patience and we need some understanding as we all try to figure this out. I haven't read the whole thing that the mayor put out, but I do know some kind of combination of telelearning and in-person seems to make sense. But the governor and mayor should figure it out so we can be aligned here. At the most, we should be strengthening the infrastructure for people to learn remotely in a way that we messed up at the beginning. So hopefully we have some of those things straightened out. But it's not going to be fully clear for a while. And we have to let people just know that and understand that. Because if we tell people one thing and then something else comes, it's kind of hard. I think learned some lessons, I hope, because we adjusted our reopening plan for phase 3 in a way I believe that was smart and intelligent based on the data that was coming in. We didn't do that at the beginning. But this is the kind of dialogue we have to have with New York City. Let them know what we know when we know it. Let them know what our plan is to this point. Let them know it's fluid. And we explain why we're making decisions that we're making. And it's about risk management. So we're never going to get rid of the risk completely, but we can manage the risk in a way that makes sense based on the data and information that we have at any given time. We absolutely have to have schools open. Does it have to be in the building at September 1? I don't know. But there are other questions, because if it's not in the building, what happens with people who have to go to work? So those are very real questions. And the God's honest truth is, I don't think we have all those answers yet. And we should be letting folks know that we're very much working on it.
I agree. And I think you bring up a very critical point, which is for working parents. Many offices, many jobs have said, I've said it to my staff, we're back to work early September. I know many businesses across the city are using that kind of back to work right after around Labor Day or right after Labor Day, because thinking schools will be back. We don't have to do remote work anymore. I think that becomes a big question. How do working parents navigate a system where they have to go to work?
We all should be having a discussion about, and a very real discussion, how many people need to be in the office every single
Absolutely.
day. Like that, we would have wasted this completely if we didn't have a workforce discussion. It's clear to me, whether we want to admit it or not, and has other ramifications, but not every person who works has to be in the office every single day. And we should look at that and figure it out. And childcare has always been an issue. We've just been able to push it on the back burner. maybe we can't anymore. And so we have to have some real infrastructure created, and we may have to just make folks at least create some type of environment where people can go to work. Because based on what we know about this corona stuff, you know, it may not be the last time that it pops up. And so the more we have an infrastructure in place, the less impact on the economy negatively that it'll have.
Right, agreed. Great. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. Let's talk about next year. Tell us what's fun and exciting for 2021, Mr. Public Advocate. What are you planning? I know there are a lot of people asking, what is Jumaane going to do next with his political life?
It's interesting, and I'm honored by folks who want me to do, I guess, higher things. My guess is there's a good amount of people who don't also, so I try to balance all those things out. But I know that it's always been hard for people to really believe that I am not trying to collect and then make political decisions based on, my decisions are not based on political chess. And I really just try to do what I think is best. So far, it's been pretty good. There will come a time where it may not be, where people don't think it's the right thing. But I as long as I can articulate why I think it is, I'm going to keep moving forward on behalf of the people of the city of New York. I asked folks for this job as public advocate, and I intend to ask them again for it in June and November of next year. And I really hope they give me another opportunity.
Well, I think, look, you clearly have taken the public advocate role and made it your own. And, it's a great bully pulpit, and it's an opportunity to help shape a conversation, which you're clearly on a good road to do.
I appreciate it. I'm going to keep trying, and with folks like you and the Congress and other people at the table is what's important, because very often we're all at different silos, and we just all have to come together and figure this out. And we got to figure it out pretty soon, actually.
We got to figure it out soon. And look, now is the moment for, as you said, for all of us to be at the same table and leave all of our personal things out the door and just come together and really get things done moving forward.
And we have to make sure there's space for honesty. And that's one of the things that's problematic. We have to make space for uncomfortability. We have to make spaces for people to say the wrong thing. Because if we don't create that space, people take that back home, and that sits with you, and you don't learn and you don't grow. And I'm trying to find a way how to make sure to create that space so people don't feel like saying the wrong thing by accident just because you didn't know or you hadn't learned yet doesn't make someone look at you like you have three heads. It just makes sure we're looking at people as human beings. I have no idea what this person's journey has been and how they got there, and I want to make sure we allow space for that.
Agreed. I think that's a critical thing. So I think that's a great place to say thank you to our public advocate. Always a great, honest conversation. And I think we have a lot of work to do with the building industry and our members and the things you're talking about. And let's really just get things done.
Thank you, everyone.
Williams,
thank you.
Thank you as always. Keep up the great work.
Peace and blessings, love and light. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And again, everyone, thank you for listening to our public advocate. We will be letting you know very soon about some of our guests for our Healthcare and Life Sciences Week, starting Monday, July 20th. There will be a guest who you will be very surprised about, but stay tuned. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.